Good evening, everybody. I'm hoping that you're able to hear me okay. And welcome to the Jewish Federation of Family Services next installment of the series Coping with COVID. And I am Ken Ribotsky, a licensed marriage and family therapist. And they have asked me to discuss men and mental health in the time of COVID. So I am going to share my screen, share some slides with you. And we'll get started. So just first, a brief intro on who I am. As I said, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm also a certified anger management specialist. I work in a private practice setting in Newport Beach and Manhattan Beach, and I participate in therapy and coaching from both locations, and of course now via video. I work with individuals and couples, and I also have a focus on men's issues, and I continue to do ongoing research in regard to men's issues and mental health specifically from a male perspective. And I bring to my therapy practice an extensive background in business as an entrepreneur in the health, pharmaceutical, and educational creative industries. So, COVID. How does coping with COVID make life a bit different than pre-pandemic? Well, it's changed a lot of things, and people are saying they feel kind of odd. And this is because the unknown has never been greater for us. We don't know how this virus and the whole world situation might directly affect our lives long term. We don't know the danger when that might be over. We need to weigh risks that we're willing to take and decide how much risk we could take on a daily basis. And we really don't know if and when things will turn back to normal. It's really changed the way we live. And for some, they're much more isolated from others than they normally would be. And this can feel pretty bad. Humans tend to be a pack animal. We are very used to being with others, and we like being with others. We feel safe with others. So isolation doesn't feel so great. And just the idea of being out in the public can be a little unsettling, feel risky, and we make choices, but some people have no choice. Healthcare workers that are helping everybody and the millions of essential workers who are out there keeping the world going, they don't really have a choice, and they are definitely taking risks. For most of us, our routines have been completely thrown off. Days can blend together. Weekends tend to not be as delineated from weekdays as they used to be. And a lot of people no longer have the separation of their workspace from their home space, and also the work time from their home time. So days become a bit of a blur. We're being limited, or we're asked to be limited to our homes for the most part. And I know that that is easing up now, but many people were feeling claustrophobic and will probably continue to have that sense. Americans, we're not accustomed to having limits put on where we can go and what we can do. One of the ways that China seems to have managed their COVID situation was by really putting some strong limitations on people. And as a society, they're very used to that, but we're not so used to that. We don't like it. We're spending much more time with our immediate family and partners, and it makes it easy to get on each other's nerves, especially if we're in constant close proximity to each other. And it's also very hard to work if you're working from home with all the distractions and the things that are going on in your home setting. Many people aren't used to being home with their kids all day, especially men. Despite the evolution of caregiving roles, where more men are primary caregivers, many men are still not really used to spending so much time with their kids. Many parents aren't used to spending so much time with their kids, and they're used to getting breaks, especially during school or at nursery school, daycare. even, having babysitters come by. And that time away from the kids is really important for each person as an individual, and also for a couple. Important to have that time together. Most parents aren't used to being homeschool teachers. That's a new role for many. And working around the house with the kids, distracting, and also guilt inducing. It feels bad to tell your child that, they have to be quiet, or it's not easy to feel like, you're pulled between that work pull and what the kids need. So in this time of COVID, our emotional security has been challenged, really in a way that we've never experienced quite before. There's this invisible disease out there that can be easily spread and randomly hurt those that we care about. That's especially problematic for men because men still tend to play out the stereotypical role of protector. And, we feel that it's our job to protect our family and those that we care for. The uncertainty that this situation creates and the lack of control created adds worry and anxiety. Many people have lost their incomes or are living in fear of losing their jobs or their incomes. It's really unsettling. Puts a lot of strain on the family. Businesses have been destroyed or in danger of closing. And the crisis, to make things worse, this crisis has been politicized, which makes it difficult to tell who to believe for information, has many people questioning the officials that, we count on day to day to keep things orderly and safe. So what's going on? What's going on in our heads? Well, I want to first start by saying it's okay to feel a bit strange right now. Don't get down on yourself if you're not feeling quite yourself. The dynamics that we've been discussing in the world that have been set off by this pandemic can take a significant toll on our emotional state, even if they were faced one at a time. But multiple of these dynamics at one time can be really, really tough. Not only what's happening in the world, but what's happening in our own home. The increased anxiety is a completely normal response. And depression can be a normal response to these kinds of stressors as well. So, what exactly is happening to us? The experts say that as a society, we're sharing a psychic state of mourning. So what exactly does that mean? Well, we are mourning the loss of our lifestyle and our ideals to some degree, and that security that I mentioned before. People fear loss more than anything. We don't like losing things. We don't like having things taken away from us. So we have a strong reaction. We don't like dramatic change. And if we're not sure that we'll ever get back what we've lost, that produces even more anxiety. And if you think about it from a work perspective, careers that have, defined people's identities, or businesses that have defined their identities, for their adult years, are in jeopardy or in trouble. And that makes us question, to some degree, who we are. The mental health experts believe that a pandemic like this can trigger what's called societal trauma. And that is trauma that's experienced by everyone, to some degree, some more than others, some less. But when the whole society experiences some kind of trauma, now scientists track how that changes things on an ongoing basis for us, and how that trauma gets passed down generation to generation. So why does this all feel so hard? Some of us say, I'm used to tough times. I'm used to dealing with tough things. Well, this is a little bit different. We're constantly surrounded right now by bad news. Even with things opening up, there seems to be some, evidence that some cases in some areas of COVID are going up. So many people have died. That is hard to deal with. It's hard to wrap our heads around, really difficult to take. And, if you think about it, more people have died during this COVID crisis just in the United States than in the Vietnam War or the Korean War. And By the time it's all over, some think that it might potentially rival the amount of Americans that died in the Second World War. That's really unsettling. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of financial stress and fear connected to this as a society. It's hard to get moments alone for us to kind of regenerate. And even simple things have become pretty tough. Going to the grocery store can generate anxiety. I know when I go to the grocery store, I can't help but think about how fast can I get out of the store. Our imperfections are much more obvious to our partners when we're spending so much time with them, and theirs to us. In my practice, I work with couples, and many of them are struggling right now. They're seeing things that they hadn't really seen before. They were able to ignore things before, and now being on top of each other, it's really obvious. It's hard for them to get time alone, to reconnect as a couple. You've got kids climbing the walls, needing to be entertained. And this new way of living in general is just difficult to adjust to. The impact of this stressful time, it might not be felt until after the threat is cleared. Some people might be doing fine now, but then have a delayed response. It's really hard to tell. So how can COVID affect men differently than women? Why even talk about this? Well, first, I think this is probably a good time to put in a caveat here. This presentation is predominantly exploring the experience of traditional male gender role scripts, although other identities are probably experiencing much of the same. But for simplicity, I've really stuck to the traditional kind of gender roles. So how might this experience be different for men? Well, I hate to tell you guys, you're not always adept at coping with issues that challenge the psyche. Unfortunately, we still raise our boys to repress their feelings and their needs. Boys are trained to believe that needing help can make them weak. Men, as well as society as a whole, still frequently measures men by how much they earn or how much they provide to their family. And that's why job loss is particularly devastating for men. So this crisis is stirring up feelings that many men are not really prepared to handle. Further, boys continue to be imprinted with scripts for self-esteem that are based on achievement. So what I mean by that is, growing up, we're told that we have to excel at sports, the arts, academics. Academics is for all of our kids. But if we don't excel, or if we're not the best at something, then we're pretty much nothing. And even if parents aren't impressing that thought on kids, they get it from other kids, and they get it from society, and they get it from the system that they're in. So we learn to define ourselves by how well we do and what we do versus how well we live our lives and interact with others. And an example of this, if you're questioning, what does that mean? Or, is this true? When was the last time you heard a woman described as a loser? The idea of a loser, when it's connected to a person, is usually relegated to men. So often, without achievement, we feel lost and worthless. That's why the loss of income or work or status can be particularly devastating for men and often result in intense shame. So we're also, used to being with our families in a different way frequently. Being home, 24/7 forces us to relate to and communicate more with our partners and our families. And generally, I hear this from all the women that I work with, my guy doesn't communicate well. Well, that's because we're not particularly raised to be communicators or relators. And again, this is changing, but it hasn't changed completely. So what I mean by that is boys are generally taught to be more independent and are given more individualistic play scripts. So if you think about it, boys are given things that they move with and they have action with, and they are often playing on their own. Girls are often pushed together with other kids, and they are often put in play settings that actually practice interacting with people. You know, even just playing with dolls teaches them how to be with people and interact with people. And if any of you have a small child or had a small child, I remember my daughter having her dolls, her Barbies, and I think it was Bratz, went from Barbies to Bratz. They talk to each other. That's all practicing language development and communication skills. Boys are generally not doing that, even still to today. And they're not encouraged to form friendships in the way girls are. They become less adept at communicating and relating, and they don't know how to form those bonds. An example of that is, you know, when boys are told, big boys don't cry. And that teaches them to repress and not express those feelings. And they learn that pretty early on. And at the same time, they're also taught if they express too much, if they become too forceful or powerful or too masculine, that's not acceptable either. So it's very confusing, you know, very confusing for boys that obviously grow up to be men. The other thing that is really obvious right now with COVID and people being home is that boys have weaker parenting models. So many families are being rearranged and blended. Boys are spending less time with their male role models than girls do with female role models. And without that strong fathering role model to emulate, they're often less comfortable with parenting. They just don't get to see it and they don't get to learn it. So communication, navigating relationships, and parenting have all become challenged by COVID in some way or another. And things that are just naturally occurring have been exacerbated by our life dynamics during this pandemic. So what's the big deal about all this? Well, it matters. And why it matters is that when men don't cope well, they can become depressed or develop debilitating anxiety, which, if you know any guys, they try really hard to hide it from everyone. Depression in men is not often reported or diagnosed. And part of that is because, besides the fact that they don't want to talk about it, that the symptoms can be very different than with women. Men often, when they're depressed, have anger, you know, or they become aggressive, or they become very restless, or they can experience risky behaviors. Stuff that doesn't look like the typical depression that gets reported in women. So it doesn't always get diagnosed. And the depression and anxiety can affect performance levels and achievement, which, as I said before, our self-concept tends to be very connected to our performance. So that pushes us into a downward spiral, which can be hard to get out of. Unmanaged depression and anxiety frequently turns into anger and shame. Anger is one of the few emotions that men are somewhat comfortable with. It's one of the things that we learn as kids that, you know, we can easily express. So as adults, we know we're not supposed to express anger. You know, we're supposed to hide that from people, but that's dangerous for everybody. What happens is if we don't express it or we don't take care of it, we turn that anger inward, and that can become, you know, more, it can exacerbate depression. We can lose confidence, and anger can easily be directed towards those closest to us, and that's problematic, even if we don't mean to do it. And then it tends to seep out when we least expect it, which is not great. The other thing that is a problem in a family setting is children, you know, really detect anger. Even if we're not saying angry words, they watch and they learn. They watch for our moods and for acceptance by us. So they're, really sensitive to that. Now, shame that can also accompany all these dynamics is one of those emotions that's pretty much unbearable for most people in general. And people will do anything not to feel it. So chances are there's going to be a lot of repression if people are feeling shame about their situation. Anger and shame have to be dealt with. Men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. So if we think that men aren't depressed, we're pretty much kidding ourselves. So what can men and their families do? Well, it's important to cope with these challenges quickly. We have to keep in mind that we are living in unprecedented times. There's no rule book for emotions during a pandemic. No one knows how to do this. We have to manage that anger and shame and get to know some go-to tools for managing this energy and those feelings. It's really important to offload the bad energy and those feelings on an ongoing basis so we don't let it build. We don't let that pot boil over. Something that people don't think about doing is dealing with it in the moment. There's like all right, I'll relax, I'll de-stress at a later date. But if we don't deal with it in the moment, sometimes our bodies actually store it. So what I tell my clients to do is do something physically, physical immediately if you feel a wave of anger or frustration. And that can be something that uses your muscles and burns energy quickly, like push-ups. You could do those anywhere. You can go for a run if you're a runner. If you're lucky enough to have a punching bag, maybe in a basement or a garage, do something like that. For maintenance, get plenty of physical exercise. And that helps us to burn up and not store those fight or flight hormones. When we feel, that we're being challenged or we're feeling stressed, our body tends to produce hormones that want to trigger fight or flight. And that's how that whole anxiety, stress loop continues itself. Get outside into the sun. Natural vitamin D and exposure to nature definitely helps us feel better. And start a simple guided meditation practice to help manage stress. Now, I know what a lot of people think is like, that's, granola and weird to meditate. What I'm suggesting is not something that, a Buddhist monk would do, but something that's guided and easy. So for example, there's an app called Buddhify. I personally use that one. They're short, easy, guided meditations, simple. There's plenty of them. There's another one called Calm. And, some of them have a small cost, some of them have a subscription, but it's a really good way to start. And also, give yourself a break. Don't feel like you have to do meditation right. Just start getting used to giving your mind some peace and some time away from the thoughts that you're managing and dealing with every day. Talk to someone. That's a simple one. Talk to them about what you're going through. Now, I know it's not always easy for guys to do that. They don't always have, a good friend that they feel comfortable talking to. But I recommend that you seek them out. And if not available, talk to a woman that you know. That's an idea. Hey, it's good practice. And they're usually good listeners. And of course, talk to a mental health professional. We're here to help. Also important, see a doctor if anything feels strange in your body. Unfortunately, negative or tough emotions can take a physical impact, have a negative physical impact on our health. Oftentimes we convert that energy into some kind of symptom. So if you're feeling something odd, don't hesitate to see a doctor. Don't say, I'm fine, I'm not going to worry about it. Catch problems early. Something else that is key in coping is trying to gain perspective. It's very easy to get caught up in our heads and focus on things that are troubling us right now. But if you can stop yourself and think about those who probably have it worse than us, it helps us to kind of gain some perspective. and, put ourselves in a place in the world that might not seem as anxiety provoking. Also, look for the humor in the current situation. And I know it could be hard to find, but I'm here to tell you that you're not a bad person if you laugh during a crisis. Laughter releases stress, and some of the stuff that you see and hear, especially on the news today, is absurd, and it's worth laughing at. So, a lot of tough things to think about, but I've also been noticing in my practice that there are some silver linings, and I think there's going to be some positive that comes out of this terrible situation that we're all faced with right now. So people, especially men, are learning how to relate to their families on a new level. They're being forced to, and a lot of them are doing a really good job. Couples are learning to reconnect. They're, like I said, spending more time together. And this is one that I really like. Fathers are spending more time getting to know their kids, and kids are seeing their fathers in a new role, in a new light. They're getting to see what they do for work. They're getting to just have more interaction and connection. And I can't help but think that that's going to have a positive impact on these children growing up from this point forward. Many people are telling me they have just more free time and they can do what they haven't gotten to, so they're excited about that. Old friends and relationships are reconnecting, and a lot of people are taking stock of their lives. They're thinking about their life path, and they're considering changes. So what I'm talking to my clients about is that now is really a great time to reinvent yourself and to question those musts. Things must be this way, or things should be this way, or I should have done it this way, or I could have done it that way. And also question our acquired expectations, those things that we gather along the way, the things that we expect, the rules that we learn to live by. We can question those. So it's really an interesting time. There's one thought that I'd like to leave you with before we have some time for Q&A, and I'll try to figure out some more questions. I have a few questions that came in, but I'm quoting Carl Jung, who is one of the grandfathers of modern psychology, and he said, "I'm not what happened to me, I'm what I chose to become." And that seemed just so fitting for right now, that this is an opportunity to really think about what we can become. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and back on screen here. And I'm going to look at some questions. Okay, so a question that's come in is, how do I control my temper with my kids when they're in the house with me and I'm working? So this is a really tough one, but go back to those tools that I mentioned about offloading the anger, offloading the frustration. But what's really key is our thought process, because oftentimes we get annoyed with our kids because they're not meeting our expectations. And unfortunately, sometimes we expect them to be little adults, and they're not. I tell my clients to think of your kids as puppies, especially if they are toddlers. They're just learning about the world. They don't know that they're not supposed to chew that shoe. One minute they know they're not supposed to, and the next minute they forget. They have very short attention spans. So if you can muster up and dig in and find the empathy and put yourself in their shoes, and really get to understand that they don't really know how to meet those expectations, it can take some of the edge off for you. The other thing that I tell clients to do is to also recognize that their kids are going to be different kids at all times, and that during this COVID crisis, they are managing their own anxieties. They have noticed, even if they're little, that things are different and that their routine has been completely thrown off. Kids that are used to going to school, have not been in school, and that's not comfortable for them. So while they might not be able to tell us that they're feeling odd or different, they can certainly be feeling it. Another question that came in was, how do I not feel so upset about being furloughed from my job? And I'm concerned that I'm not going to get rehired back. Well, that's a tough one. And like I mentioned before, we're really connected to what we do and our ability to earn money and provide for ourselves and for our families. So it's to be expected that if we lose that income and we lose our job, that we're going to feel it in some way. And what I recommend clients do is to make time and use their time in a different way. Make a job out of looking for a job or new work. And I know right now might not be the best time for it, but certainly you can do a lot of research to figure out where else you possibly can work or what else you might want to do, and schedule yourself during the day, like it's a job, to be doing that work. Because when we do that, it changes our thought patterns. We feel like we're doing something positive, and it also gives us a sense of control. We can feel like we're doing something about it. And when we've lost our job, we feel like we have no control, but we can feel like we have some forward motion. And we can feel a sense of control, which feels a lot better. So hopefully you guys found all of this useful. And I'm happy to continue the conversation with anybody who would like to. I can reshare here my slides that have my email on them. Here it is. If you want to continue the conversation or you have any more questions, feel free to call me at info@kenribotskytherapist.com. And these slides will be available to you. The Jewish Federation will be posting them. So hopefully you can find them if you need to. So thanks again. And I will be wrapping it up. Thanks for joining the series. Thank you from the Federation. I hope you enjoyed their series on coping with COVID. Thanks.